Welcome to DairyPod, a podcast series from Dairy Australia. Featuring a range of experts, each episode offers insights into Australia's unique dairy farming conditions, as well as personal experiences and the latest in dairy innovation.
Hello, I'm Meghan Lodwick, Communications Manager at Gardiner Foundation, and hosting this conversation on DairyPod to mark 25 years since Gardiner was established. Given the work that Gardiner has done with Dairy Australia over the years, we are excited to tell that story, not just with numbers, but with the voices of the people who built it, the people it has shaped, and the person now leading it forward. Before we get into it, it's probably worth setting the scene. Gardiner was set up 25 years ago to back the long-term future of dairy in Victoria, not just through farms, but through people, research, and communities. Since then, it's supported more than 700 projects across the industry. But what really matters is the impact of that. Stronger farm businesses, better leadership, new technology on farm, and more resilient communities around the industry. That's what we're really here to talk about, not just where Gardiner came from, but what it's actually changed on the ground, and why it still matters to farmers today. Let's start at the beginning with former Victorian Premiers Jeff Kennett and John Brumby, former Minister for Agriculture Keith Hamilton, and dairy legend Max Fairing.
I often say the most interesting thing in life is not the wealth or the position or the principles you hold, it's the people you meet along that life's journey that make life enriched. And I've been enriched by the dairy farmers of Victoria giving me the opportunity to manage change and make sure that they were in a better position to move forward from there.
Hi, I'm Jeff Kennett. I entered the Victorian Parliament in 1976. And there were two areas that caught the attention of most of my colleagues. One was the dairy industry, and the other was the egg industry. And then over the passage of time, it came to our realisation that the dairy industry was going through a great deal of change. And that led us to the view to deregulate. The government changed in '99, and the incoming government under Steve Bracks and John Brumby as the Treasurer, enacted the legislation that we fundamentally had worked for some time with the industry to put in place.
I was Finance Minister, Minister for Regional Development, and we had to put in place a plan for the dairy industry. So I proposed that we have a ballot of the Victorian dairy farmers. My private view was strongly in support of deregulation, but we had a ballot. We thought that would be successful. And when the vote was taken, close to 90% of all Victorian dairy farmers voted in support of deregulation.
Having got that result, the first process was to start to sell off some of the brands that were owned through the industry. One of those was the Big M brand, very popular, very big seller, and we thought, well, we'll put it on the market. Went through the process of competitive tendering, expecting perhaps 10 or 12 million. The end result was 62 million, which was a shock in some ways, not only to me, but also Treasury and also to the dairy industry itself and its leaders.
The Gardiner Foundation simply came about that the Minister at the time gave us the opportunity to make use of the sale of the assets that the BDI had. We could have lost it back into state revenue, but thankfully to Keith Hamilton and John Brumby at the time and the Victorian government, they said no, those assets should be used for the benefit of the Victorian dairy farmers and the manufacturers. So when that opportunity arose, we took it, and we didn't quite know how we'd put it all together, but we did that successfully. The cheque was ended up in Chris Nixon's hand. He was the nominated, and he walked to a bank in Hawthorn and deposited that cheque on behalf of the dairy farmers of Victoria and the milk manufacturers and processors. And from that point on, we got to work and made sure it was used in the best benefit of the farmers.
And so it's returned to the industry, 60 million or so, all went into the Geoffrey Gardiner Fund, named after the late Geoffrey Gardiner, who was a charismatic leader of the dairy industry. And the rest is really history. It's been extraordinarily successful. It's supported many great projects over 25 years in the Victorian dairy industry.
Having received the $62 million, a great surprise, I can assure you, I was very keen on the idea that we should use it throughout the community as well as for the dairy farmers themselves. And so the schools, the social events, the churches, the local pubs, all of those things make up a country community, and that makes a thriving country community.
Those voices tell you something important. This wasn't a cautious decision. It was a bold one. 25 years on, that original $62 million has grown to more than $190 million, continuing to be invested back into Victorian dairy and its communities. And while Gardiner was established for Victoria, the impact hasn't stayed there, with benefits and learning flowing across the broader Australian dairy industry. Joining me now is the person leading that work today, Allan Cameron, CEO of Gardiner Foundation. Allan, welcome.
Thanks, Megan. It's great to be here.
Now, we just heard from some of the people who were there at the beginning. What strikes you most listening back, and what did the founders get right that perhaps they didn't even know they were getting right?
Well, I guess first and foremost, the advocacy movement did a terrific job of gaining overall industry consensus around deregulation and how that would come about. One of the things that they advocated for was the use of the VDIA assets, that should be held in trust or held in a foundation for the benefit of the industry. So that was a bold idea, and because they got clear consensus across the industry, that allowed them to get support from the government of the day to do it. So to me, that was one of the critical first things they got right. But then I guess once that decision was made, the founders also got key principles right around how Gardiner should function into the future. They also got right what the role of Gardiner would be, and they very clearly were able to articulate what Gardiner would avoid doing. So I thought that was, when we look back now, that was a great advantage for all of the board and the staff, and also more broadly the larger industry, to know, okay, what is Gardiner's role in the industry? How would we go about doing business, and what won't we do? So if I could, Megan, some of the things that, stand out in my mind around how Gardiner would function, and these decisions were made back in that time of sort of 2000, 2001, was that Gardiner would have to have a very clearly defined purpose. And they did do that. They worked out that Gardiner should manage its funds to maximise benefits to all sectors of the Victorian dairy industry and to Victorian dairy communities. So that was terrific that they could articulate that purpose right up front. They also decided that Gardiner would be an enabler rather than a doer. They looked around, they did a scan of the industry, and there were already a lot of organisations that had very clearly defined responsibilities to support the industry, be they advocacy movement, the precursor to Dairy Australia, or the RDPs in the regions. And so they decided, the founders, that Gardiner would be best off being able to enable things to happen and facilitate activities happening rather than actually doing the doing. And what that meant was that they were able to say, well, we don't need a large staff. We could actually operate, quite a lean business. So a board of 5, and they ensured that there was a really highly skilled and experienced director set. And that's also stood the test of time. If you look back at the chairs of Gardiner being Chris Nixon, Mike Taylor, Bruce Kefford, Len Stevens, and our chair today of Andrew Metcalf, we've always had really highly skilled and experienced chairs and company directors. And then a small team that's really focused on enabling industry to do things. So that was a key principle right up front. The other thing they worked out was that we'd be better off to actually outsource the management of money rather than trying to get and build an investment team in-house. The founders said, well, actually, let's outsource that and use the best in class. So for over 25 years now, that's exactly what's happened is, so rather than spend that money and try and bring in staff to do it, let's just outsource it to the best and brightest minds. And that principle's held true. And in 2017, there was an evolution to diversify how we managed the funds further. And I think when we look at the performance of Gardiner and how those funds have been managed, again, that was a principle that was set back in 2001 that they got right. And the other thing they said was, we're not to be a funder of last resort, that we're best off to actually try and focus on really important things and do less but larger investments to support industry, and because they'll have the biggest bang for the buck. So that's something that we continue to do today, and we're always thinking about that. So to me, that was, there's some of the things that have stood the test of time and they got right. They also looked at the role of the foundation and said, well, we're starting off with $62 million. If we can maintain those funds, the real value of those funds over the test, over the long term, then they started to comprehend the potential size of impact that Gardiner might be able to have 5, 10, 15, 25 years out. And I think by doing that and saying, well, look, let's maintain the real value of that and actually invest some of the income that comes off it, they've actually, by saying that they're providing a very clear steer that we're going to invest in perpetuity, and the Gardiner Foundation will be invest, for the long term. It'll be here to support multiple generations, not just one generation. That was always a challenge, that they could have dispersed all of the funds immediately and then it would have been gone. They actually very clearly stated, no, we want to be around in perpetuity. So let's actually set up our business to be able to support multiple generations of dairy farmers and dairy communities and stakeholders. So, to me, that was just a guiding principle that really set Gardiner up, not just for our generation, but for multiple generations. So that idea of thinking big and thinking long term, that was clearly articulated back in 2001. There were some things that they also said that they wanted to avoid. So getting involved in advocacy was one of those things. That have clearly defined advocacy bodies. And so that's not Gardiner's role to get involved in politics. And so, we joke as an organisation that we like to see ourselves as Switzerland. Our purpose is to work across all sectors of the industry, so be it farmers or the processing sector or community. And that also means that we need to be working with, governments of all political persuasions. So, we are very neutral around how we'll do that. But again, that was a founding principle. We're also trying to make sure that we're investing in a way that, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so it's always difficult trying to invest to support the processing sector because they're highly competitive. And so that's always a challenge, is how can we actually invest in a way that we're supporting that milk processing, milk manufacturing sector in a way that all will benefit rather than just one brand or one business over another. That remains true now. And we'd leave things like trade and that to the federal government or the state government. So, we don't get involved, and Dairy Australia, we don't do those things. So, they were clearly articulated back in 2000, 2001. I think they were guiding principles that have really stood the test of time. And they do influence the way that we run the business today. So I think it was a great credit to them, to those founders. And that was on the back of a lot of industry engagement. They really got out and, canvassed dairy farmers, processors, government to be able to help formulate those principles.
It sounds like a whole of industry approach, really.
It is. Yeah, that's right. It's difficult in the processing manufacturing sector because our investments there, we need to be agnostic. We can't be seen to be benefiting, the commercial players, because it's a highly competitive world that the processors work in. So we're trying to find ways that we can invest in those programs that are going to support all milk processors and dairy product manufacturers at the same time. It's a whole lot easier when we can invest in communities, if you like, and show that this has got a big, broad benefit for any one dairy community. And the other one is just investing in people. Gardiner, over 25 years now, has been, I think, very good at trying to invest in people, be that through leadership programs and scholarships and the like. So I think everyone, all the stakeholders in industry can actually see the benefit from investing in dairying people.
For sure. And Gardiner's also had a longstanding relationship with Dairy Australia, which goes well beyond any single program of investment. Can you give us a picture of what that partnership has been like over the past, quarter of a century, and what makes it possible that neither organization could do alone?
So there's been a range of things, I think, that we could look at that Dairy Australia and Gardiner have done together. Obviously, Gardiner brings the benefit of capital or funds, and Dairy Australia have got all of the connections through the regional services, the RDPs and the like, and they've got a really committed group of staff that can actually help develop ideas further. Some of the, and sometimes they can be small ideas that grow into national programs. And I think about Cows Creates Careers, I think, came out of the Strzelecki Lions Club. Gardiner Foundation provided some seed investment for that. That was obviously worked up by Gipps Dairy, the RDP, and then I guess it was something that just got out of hand, Meghan, that idea then grew, and it became a national program that was delivered by Dairy Australia and the RDPs right across Australia. And so now there are a lot of students that across Australia that have had exposure to the dairy industry that they wouldn't have had if Gardiner, Dairy Australia, and indeed the RDPs hadn't actually linked into that in a collaborative way. And also the dairy farmers themselves that got in behind that Cows Creates Careers program. Another one would be Our Farm, Our Plan, so that strategic planning program. Again, that came up through, a range of people sort of, I love that saying that, a great idea has many parents, and I think there's Our Farm, Our Plan would be one of those. But that strategic planning program, the idea or genesis of that came together, and Gardiner got in behind that and provided funding to actually help Dairy Australia and RDPs actually develop that Our Farm, Our Plan tool, or the program of work. That's now been rolled out. I think over 780 Victorian dairy farms have participated in that to date, and it's sort of 12 to 1,300 farmers right across Australia have actually participated in that. And the overwhelming evaluation from farmers that have got into it, that's a highly valuable strategic planning program for them to go through. So I think that's just one example there. And then at times the dairy industry, like all agricultural industries, seem to go through this, the highs and lows. I think it's just the nature of agriculture on a continent like Australia. But there have been times of, be it drought, flood, milk price step down, etc., where Gardiner has been able to release funding to support Dairy Australia to indeed support dairy farmers. And so one of times or a couple of times that jump to mind, one would be 2016 milk price step down. I think from memory, Gardiner released about $1.4 million really quickly to help Dairy Australia and the RDPs to roll out tactics for tight times, and in particular taking stock, which was funding that supported dairy farmers to bring in consultants to actually support them with their financial budgeting, feed budgeting, etc. And again, the evaluation was that taking stock was an incredible program. It really supported farmers at that critical moment in their business lives. So that was a really good thing for Gardiner to be able to actually come in behind Dairy Australia with the program that they'd developed up. And I think at the time that was really well recognised. There's been other moments, if I think about the floods in northern Victoria in 2022, again, that was a really critical time for those farmers up there and indeed the dairy communities. And so Dairy Australia and Murray Dairy produced a plan of action, and we're really pleased at Gardiner to actually come in behind and help fund some of those things. And more recently, in the last couple of years, drought has affected particularly southwest Victoria, but it ended up being Victoria-wide, but certainly southwest Vic was affected by drought for a couple of years. And so we were able to respond by releasing some funds to a collective effort that the dairy industry had put together. So dairy industry leaders, farmers, community members had put together a plan of action, and our board was really pleased to actually provide some funds. Ultimately, Finwell Support, the Rural Financial Counselling Service in West Vic, received that money, and they were able to distribute that either directly by supporting counsellors going up and meeting with individual farmers and farming couples, or releasing funds to community-based activities. So be that a night at the local pub for dairy communities to come together, but there were movie nights that were really popular throughout Western Victoria. So that was just some initiatives there, Meghan, that I think was really well received by the farmers that either directly got the support from Finwell, the Rural Financial Counselling Service, or indeed those communities that got together and sort of coalesced around particular events.
It's interesting. Do you think that Gardiner's independence helps it be able to step up quicker or in a different capacity than other organizations would be able to?
I think it can at those moments. because the board has, if like, the appetite or the license to be able to release those funds and respond quickly at a time of need like that. What they're also mindful, though, is are there those agencies that can actually use the funds and deliver in an impactful way to support at a time like that? And clearly Dairy Australia has got some terrific people who know the industry well, and other agencies as well, be that Agriculture Victoria, either the Rural Financial Counselling Services and so on. Just, Megan, what I might say too, just the question before that about Dairy Australia and the partnership, it was remiss of me not to say that Gardiner has proudly co-invested alongside or co-funded work alongside Dairy Australia and Agriculture Victoria, in particular around scientific programs of work. And so the two that stand out, Dairy Bio and Dairy Feed Base, so long-standing investments of both Dairy Australia, Gardiner and AgVic. And that's again, Gardiner appreciating the collective effort of both AgVic and DA in discovering, well, what are those things that need to, what are those challenges that need to be solved? And they developed up the scientific program, and Gardiner was able to respond to that by co-funding those investments.
Of course, and there's been some great results from that, including herd management and multi-species pasture management. And there's certainly a long history of partnership that's yielded some great results. The genetic improvement of the Australian herd over that period of time has been well recognised, and a lot of farmers have benefited greatly by investing in the genetics in their herd. 100%. 100%. I wanted to go back to your points on communities. Of course, Gardiner, one of Gardiner's many sort of areas it supports are dairy communities. It invests a bit into communities, not just farms. Can you explain why it's so important to invest in communities for dairy?
Well, dairy farmers just don't operate their farm in isolation. I guess in any given day, they do, and they've got a lot to deal with on their farms in any given day. But when you think about it, they are always engaging with service providers that come out of the dairy community. Most dairy farmers live on their dairy farms. Many of them will have children that go to local schools. They'll all need to go to the local hospital or GP clinic. They'll all be involved in local sporting clubs and service providers, so be that the football club, the cricket, tennis, etc., be it state emergency service, SES, or the CFA. They're all, dairy farmers are great at putting their hands up and getting involved. I love that saying, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. There are probably no busier people than dairy farmers, and yet many of them have got this terrific attitude of volunteering their time away from their farm and really supporting community-based activity and community organisation. So the vision for Gardiner is thriving, vibrant Victorian dairy communities where people want to live, work and invest. And I guess what we're looking at there is that dairy farmers and dairy businesses underpin the dairy industry. And if they're doing well, then that will actually also support thriving, vibrant Victorian dairy communities, and we really need those. It's a virtuous cycle, if you like. If we've got dairy farmers doing well, dairy communities will do well, and likewise, if dairy communities are doing well, we'll have more teachers, more nurses, more health service providers will have attracted to work and live and work in those communities. Yeah, that community-based spirit will be there when you've got thriving Victorian dairy farms and dairy communities. And then the other one would be is when we look at the processing sector, Megan, and you've got processors doing well, they employ a lot of people. And so those towns where there are milk processors, they will have a lot of people either working in the plant themselves, or they'll have those supporting service sector services that are actually coming in and working in the plant as well. And that's really critical. And all of those people get paid. They all, support local businesses. They buy their groceries, fuel, etc. And they're the ones that make up the numbers at the footy club and the netball club, tennis, and so on. They're the ones that volunteer with the CFA. They're the ones that volunteer on the local hospital boards and so on. So, I think it's just, it makes sense for Gardiner to be really trying to support dairy communities as well. And going back to your original question about what did they get right, if you like, those that the original founders, if I think about the Minister for Agriculture at the time, Keith Hamilton, he was the one that really insisted that within Gardiner's purpose, that there would be funds set aside to support Victorian dairy communities, because Keith really got that. And I think that's been credited by Max Ferring and others over the years since, that how insightful that was of Keith as that minister at the time to insist that take place. So, I reckon that's something that really over a long period of time, people do recognise that Keith as a minister had a really strong influence over Gardiner's purpose with respect to dairy communities.
For sure. I mean, it's a big remit, Alan. We've touched on tactical projects, or, projects that are aimed to help people in the industry through challenges. We've talked about communities. We've talked about impacting education with Cows Create Careers. Over the next 25 years, there's challenges that are affecting the industry: climate resilience, workforce, housing, technology. They're significant. What are Gardiner's priorities heading into the next 25 years?
Well, one of them, a more immediate one right now, is in February we launched Elevate Dairy, and that's a landing pad for ag tech and ag innovation into the Victorian dairy industry. I guess the hypothesis or the premise, Megan, is that there is something happening either overseas or in a different industry from dairy here in Australia with respect to ag tech and innovation that hasn't yet landed. And what we want to do is learn from dairy farmers in Victoria about what are all the challenges that they face on farm, and some of the ones you just mentioned. And then once we've actually gone through and done that discovery of all the challenges, many of them are well known by everybody, but it's then a prioritisation piece and saying, okay, which of those are the most important or most urgent and most impactful now? We have scouted the world and looked to try and solve some of those problems, and we've now have a database of over 300 innovators. We had 68 innovators apply, and we're now down to inviting 7 of those innovators to actually come and land in Victoria in a roadshow in August this year, and with farmers to then come and test them, come and kick the tyres and actually have a look and meet the founders, meet the innovators, have a look at their technology and just test, do the Victorian farmers think that might be fit for purpose for their farm? And this is all about trying to support farmers with that technology transfer piece. So what we looked at was that we were quite heavy on big R research with our programs over the last 10 years. And so what we've tried to do is just diversify our research and innovation portfolio by putting more into this technology transfer piece. And so that's what Elevate Dairy is aiming to do. We're still continuing to invest in big R, if you like, research programs with AgVic and Dairy Australia and other research institutes around Australia, all about bringing science back into Victorian dairy farms. But this is a more immediate, we're hoping to be more immediately impactful. And if that we can speed up that technology transfer onto Victorian dairy farms, we hope that that'll mean that they'll be more profitable more quickly, they'll be more sustainable in turn from that. So that's super exciting. And all the dairy farmers that have lent into that and helped us so far are really excited with where we're going. I guess the proof's going to be in the pudding come August, and we do the right show, and farmers will actually, across Victoria, will get a better understanding of those 7 that have been invited. And next year we'll undertake exactly the same process. We'll put out an expression of interest for worldwide innovators to solve the next set of challenges, and see who can come. And also by next year, there might be, of those 7 that lands this year, we may well have support the expansion or adoption of that technology onto Victorian dairy farms, and at least do commercial trials and showcase them through discussion groups and focus farms and the like. So that's super exciting. You mentioned the likes of workforce and housing, and there are some programs we're doing at the moment with Agriculture Victoria. We're co-investing in a culturally and linguistically diverse program of work. And there's 2 elements to that. One is trying to support dairying communities to become communities of choice for people of a CALD, culturally and linguistically diverse background, so that if those people could actually, of that background, could actually feel really welcome and well supported within dairying communities, have we got everything right within those communities to support them? And then the other piece of work is, can we help dairy farmers to become employers of choice for people of multicultural backgrounds or where English isn't their primary language, etc. And so that's really exciting. We're getting great results across Gippsland and Northern Victoria, and we're really keen to expand that work into Southwest Vic as well. And it's been really well received by dairy farmers. There are many dairy farmers who are employers of choice of people of a culturally and linguistically diverse background. And what we're trying to do is to actually speed up all of those learnings from those farmers and actually try and, facilitate rolling those learnings out to other farmers and other communities. There are always going to be workforce initiatives, I think, but that's one that we're doing right now in real time. Another one you mentioned was housing, and we just know that from engaging with communities, engaging with farmers, and the board heard loud and clear throughout 2022-23 as we're developing our current strategic plan, that housing is a critical issue in rural and regional communities, not just for dairy, but certainly it's real for dairy as well. So we put out an expression of interest to see what agencies, what stakeholders might be interested in actually trying to find ways that we could provide solutions for dairy communities and farmers around how can we increase housing supply for either people who work in dairy or people who work in dairy communities that, for instance, in essential services, be they health service providers, emergency service providers, etc. And how can we help those farmers find appropriate accommodation for people who work on their farm, be that in a community or on their farms themselves. And similarly, we know that the milk processors, they're struggling with this too. So housing is one of the serious constraints around attracting really good quality people to the industry and indeed retaining them. So we're well developed on looking at and assessing some of those solutions that have been put forward through the expression of interest, and hopefully over the next 12 months or so that we can actually start to invest in those and find others who join us on that investment journey. But that's a really exciting one that we're working on too.
It's super exciting. It sounds like Gardner's really focused on some new avenues to kind of preserve the stability of the industry, ones that, are going to be of challenge over the next few years.
Yeah, we are, Megan. And I think, again, if I just circle back, and
Sure.
I didn't answer this in the original question, but one of the things that the founders got right was to think in perpetuity, to think long term, and to actually establish a business with a purpose in perpetuity in mind. And I think it's just what you were saying there about the industry. Well, we strongly believe that the dairy industry in Victoria is here for the long term. It is an in perpetuity play, if you like, from an investment jargon. And not only are there's the corpus of funds that we're managing, we're doing that with that long-term mindset, but the investments that we're trying to put back into dairy farmers, the processing sector or communities is all with that longevity in mind. What can we do to make sure that individual dairy farming business, milk processing sector is supported in a way that it knows that it's got a long-term future, and just as critically that those dairy communities that they know that they really have got a strong future and that they'll be thriving and vibrant well into the future. So I think that is something that the founders got right back. This was not a short-term fix. It wasn't a short, the foundation wasn't seen as a short-term foundation with fixed date in mind. It's actually seen as multi-generational and an in perpetuity investor.
Yeah, it's an important role. Allan, I have one more question for you. If you could say one thing to a young person in a dairy community on a farm, wondering whether there's a future in the industry and what that future might look like for them, what would it be?
There is absolutely a future in the dairy industry for you. I would say that the Victorian dairy industry is a great place to invest your money, but more importantly, to invest your time. I think just in the same way that Gardiner is a long-term investor, dairy is a long-term play, and you do have to invest your time in it. But I think it is well worth doing that. As I look at friends and colleagues who are involved in dairy, I think the long-term thing is that they've just had a terrific time doing it. They ride their ups and downs, but over the long term, they've just got immense enjoyment from it. And over a period of time, they do happen to build long, sustainable wealth.
And like you said, thriving, vibrant communities,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
For
right.
sure.
And when I think about this is, I've had a long connection. My whole life's been involved in agriculture, and I look around and think, geez, where dairy is thriving, where the dairy farmers are thriving, where the processors are thriving, you will have thriving dairy communities. And that all then just flows onto all of those things that those communities do well. And so it's why I'm passionate about dairy. It's why I'm passionate about the role that I'm in, and particularly passionate about the purpose of Gardiner Foundation.
For sure. And on a personal note, I've never not visited a dairy farm and felt incredibly motivated. So, there's something in that.
Yeah, that's right. And I get that too. There are times when, everyone gets really busy in their roles. And there are times when I've been invited to go off to a function of some sort. And I think, oh, geez, how am I going to squeeze this in? And every single time I drive away and think, geez, that was well worth my time, because the confidence or infectious nature of dairy farms or dairy farmers is really empowering. And so I get a spring in my step every time that I'm hanging out with a group of positive dairy farmers. It's terrific. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, Allan, thank you so much for taking your time to chat.
Thanks, Megan. I really appreciate it. And really, really looking forward to continuing the journey that we're on. Thanks again.
Again, Allan, thank you. And to everyone whose voice you heard in this episode, from those who built this foundation a quarter of a century ago to the leaders and farmers and community members it has supported ever since, thank you. Be sure to check out the episode notes for more information.
Thank you for joining today's DairyPod episode. We hope you found it enjoyable and insightful. For more information, check out the episode notes. You can stay up to date by following DairyPod on your favourite podcast platform. To get in touch, visit dairyaustralia.com.au. Until next time, take care.